A year ago, I had this reaction to Wargaming's buff of the M6 heavy tank. That seems crazy for me. Wow, Wargaming, this is pretty... I think that this one is going to be one of the hot tanks, boys and girls. I think this is going to be one of the hot tanks. That is going to mean that the M6 is going to have a better DPM than everything apart from the KV-1S, although, as we can see, that isn't really helping the KV-1S very much, at least with regards to its win ratio. I think that this is probably going to be one of the most terrifying tier 6 tanks that you could ever play with or specifically against. Huge buffs to a vehicle that I already thought was okay. A vehicle that I thought was okay didn't need a buff, and now a year later, I can tell you it really didn't need a buff. Before we move on to the gameplay, I want to draw attention to what the statistics were of the M6 back a year ago with regards to how popular it was compared to other heavy tanks. We can see that it was played significantly less than every other tier 6 heavy tank apart from the ARL and the Churchill 7, with tanks like the VK3601 played 3 times as much and the KV2 played 4 times as much, something which the buff that I'm about to show you has definitely changed. Now you're seeing the M6 played pretty much about a week or 2 ago in the current version of World of Tanks, and the only thing that's really going to stop me from being able to crush the enemy team is going to be my own team, just I guess causing a roadblock. They're like, oh no, it's another overpowered M6, which are going to stop in the middle of the road and be able to hold it up. Okay, Wargaming buffed this thing so darn much that it has catapulted its win rate from, albeit being one of the second worst tanks, all the way up to now being by far the best tier 6 heavy tank. It's crazy effectively what they did all at the same time with this vehicle, with doubling its turret armor. They buffed its hit points by 100. So of course, I'm going to whack a durability device on it to now have the same kind of hit points that I have on a tier 8 medium tank, like the one that just went into the game, the GSAW 1010. And yet, nobody else at tier 6 seems to really have these hit points, with me having 50% more than the Skoda there. I guess some of the heavies might. There we go, the KV-1S at 1050. Add to that the fact that Wargaming buffed the view range up by 10 meters, so that if you've got a good crew like I do and use a premium consumable, then coated optics become optional. That frees up room for something like vents or a durability or a gun rammer, and the gun rammer further boosts Wargaming's rate of fire. This is a tier 6 heavy tank that's hitting for 240 a go. A tier 6 heavy tank that not only hits for 240 with a good penetration with 160, but 243 millimeters of penetration. Usually what Wargaming do in World of Tanks is they take a medium tank gun from the higher tier and they put it down a tier on a heavy tank. Think about something like, well, I guess it doesn't really work for the Comet, but that would be the other way. Actually, it does work for the Comet. I'm pretty sure the Churchill at tier 6 kind of has a Comet gun, and it's the same with the M6. It's using the T20's gun. Now, this gun is good at tier 7 when it only has 1,600 damage per minute. The M6 is firing literally a third faster than the T20 does at a lower tier, while also having like triple the turret armor as well. Wargaming also buffed the gun handling of this vehicle, its aim time going from 2.3 seconds to 2 seconds. And what is the result? Sure, the hull armor still sucks, but it baffled me that Wargaming would buff this tank so much all at the same time. And this has got me worried about Wargaming's balancing department, at least sometimes. Now, let me clarify. It's not all bad news. I think Wargaming's balancing department are doing a fantastic job with addressing the Chieftain and the 279E. I also think of all of the buffs in the upcoming patch, I think most of them are going to be okay. But there's something that there's a key point that I want to address. And that is that I feel that Wargaming's balancing department is not balancing tanks, so to say, based on often their statistics. I genuinely think that they are buffing vehicles that are unpopular that they want to make more popular. Or alternatively, they're buffing vehicles like the M6 that maybe are a drop-off down the tank tree. What Wargaming will do is they'll look at how players play through a tech tree. And then what they will do is they'll say, oh look, a lot of people are stopping once they reach this part of the tank. And then, or this part of the tech tree. And then quite rightly from a game developer perspective, if all you care about is trying to get people to go up the tech tree, is they'll buff a vehicle that is kind of causing drop-off in all of the investment that they've made in players coming into their game. Kind of like a blockage that would stop people from continuing up down a super happy line down a tech tree. Now, that's okay as long as they don't overbuff a vehicle or take a vehicle that was frankly already pretty okay and decide to buff it. Now, for a tech tree tank, that's not entirely the worst possible thing that could happen in the game, because not that many people are going to grind tech tree tanks again and again and again and again, although that's not entirely true when we take a look at seal clubbers down at tier 5 and below. The T-67 is still, even with the nerfs, a very played and dangerous tank at tier 5. The M6 has catapulted from being a tank which I thought was pretty fine, pretty dangerous tank with great pen that I have to take seriously, to now being a vehicle that I'm absolutely terrified to meet in any tank. And that's because it's basically a tier 8 medium tank like the Pershing, down at tier 6. It has better turret armor, it has better engine power, and it has a very comparable gun, especially if the M6 fires gold. And the result is, in 5.5 minutes in this game, we've kind of got almost tier 9 worthy results, with possibly the most nonchalant 1,666 base experience at tier 6 that I have ever got, with our 4,400 damage and 4 kills. And we didn't need to fire gold ammunition in this game, or at least much of it, making a 50,000 credits profit, while also getting a steel wall with the newly buffed mantlet. So the result is, at least on the last 30 days on the European server, that now the M6 has by far the best win rate, only slightly behind a premium tank like the KV-2R. Its win rate is 53% for a tech tree vehicle. And unfortunately, when people realize there are overpowered vehicles like this inside the game, it is now the second most played heavy tank at tier 6, only second to the infamous K2. So how Wargaming's balancing department ever thought that these kind of buffs were a good idea for this vehicle is beyond me. It's doing far too much all at the same time. I personally think that even the view range and the gun handling and the rate of fire buff would have been enough, instead of giving this thing a monstrous mantlet, great hit points, and some reverse speed. So much so that when we compare the M6 to the tier 8 medium tank, the Pershing, it completely destroys on damage per minute. It's got better aim time, comparable accuracy. The gun handling is worse. Sure, still got great gun depression. Its top speed is not as good as the Pershing, but it has a better power to weight ratio with similar ground resistances. Its hull armor is similar, both awful for even at tier 6, let alone tier 8, but it has pretty much double the turret armor. It's absolutely mad that the M6 would be in the game as it is. And unfortunately, the player base picks up on these things, and Wargaming create problems where there weren't problems. Now, this wouldn't be the biggest of deals if it was not really for the elephant in the room, and that is that we have a huge new series of vehicle changes going into the live server on Wednesday. Wargaming are buffing copious amounts of premium tanks. And I think that all in all, they've done a pretty good job with the changes. I think that the WZ-113G is overbuffed, and I think that is going, especially at a time when they're nerfing the Object 268 version 4, I think that is going to become just as much of a problem as the Object 268 version 4. I personally also think that the VK4502A has been received possibly the biggest buff in World of Tanks history, and that's going to become a problem at tier 8. But the real elephant in the room, or I guess the turtle in the room here, is the tier 8 British tank destroyer. Wargaming are giving this one of the biggest buffs I think I've ever seen on any tank, premium tank in the history of the game. They're buffing its top speed by 25%, its reverse speed, they're buffing its dispersion when it's moving, its penetration, and its shell velocity. Now, this would be absolutely fine if the turtle was in an awful, terrible position. But frankly, it's not. The turtle has a 50.52% win ratio right now, better than half of the premium tank destroyers in the game, and way better than something like a Jagdtiger 88, for example, which could actually truly need some love. And you really don't have to be a statistical wizard to know what's going to happen when Wargaming apply huge buffs to a vehicle that is already performing absolutely fine on the battlefield. And this leads me to one of my big concerns with Wargaming's balancing department, is that they're focusing a little bit too much on the monetization and they're being a little bit too gung-ho with the changes. The Turtle is one of the least popular tier 8 premium tanks in the game, and it doesn't really make sense as to why it's so unpopular. That is because if you think about the Tortoise at tier 9, that's an incredibly not only popular but powerful tank. I would go as far as to say completely broken overpowered, and the Tortoise does ruin quite a few games of World of Tanks that I end up playing. And so I would argue that one of the main reasons why Wargaming is buffing the Turtle is clearly not based on how it's performing, because I think its current performance in the game is absolutely fine, if not a little too good. But Wargaming are buffing this tank because they see it as a monetization opportunity for a vehicle that they already have inside the game, at the expense of game balance. The Turtle does not need a buff, let alone effectively getting a whole extra equipment slot, as using a turbo on this vehicle was mandatory before, and it will arguably still be mandatory on this tank. Wargaming will be taking away all of the weaknesses for a vehicle that has, to all intents and purposes, tier 10 tank destroyer damage per minute. And it was bad enough when tier 6 or tier 7 tanks had to try and engage one of these things frontally when it managed to get onto a ridgeline, when it was driving along at 20 kilometers an hour, and good luck trying to deal with this thing on a ridgeline now when it's able to race there at 30 kilometers an hour if it's using a turbo. So before I come to my conclusion, I want to reiterate again that Wargaming, I'm really happy that you're listening to the community and you're buffing and nerfing vehicles inside the game. It's great for change, it's great for excitement around the patches. It's good to kind of shake up the meta a little bit. And I think what Wargaming are doing with addressing the balance of explicitly overpowered tier 10 vehicles, ones that were deemed untouchable before, really gives me faith that they're not just trying to cater towards the extra elite, and that no tank, irrelevant of how prestigious they are inside the game, is able to avoid balancing for the good of World of Tanks and for the betterment of the community. However, I also thoroughly feel that Wargaming might be doing too much all at the same time to quite a few vehicles. And the last thing that we really want is another example of the AMX M4, where Wargaming hugely buffed it all in a single patch. It became all that anyone was playing, and then they had to nerf it not once, but twice to be able to get it back into a position. Because that time where the vehicle was outrageously overpowered completely destroyed their competitive game mode. Well, not completely, but it definitely massively impacted the competitive game mode onslaught, as well as also just making the random queue an absolute toxic cesspool for the duration that the vehicle was overpowered. And unfortunately, another thing that I would be concerned about is when Wargaming buff a premium tank, while they have obviously showed that they're willing to nerf reward vehicles, until they're willing to take the next step and show us that they are willing to nerf premium tanks, I get ultra concerned when I see that they buff premiums in case they make another mistake, in case they make another BZ176, in case they make another Skoda T56, because I can tell you, as somebody who plays a whole variety of tiers in World of Tanks and plays a whole variety of tanks, not even on my main account, but on my free-to-play account as well, tanks like that are just incredibly destructive to the player base's enjoyment of the game. And I would argue that the BZ176, while it made Wargaming a good amount of money last year with the loot boxes, has probably caused a lot of players to quit since then. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brace yourself, turtles are coming for you. And with deep irony, a tank called the Turtle, which you'd expect to be slow, isn't even going to be slow inside the game. If the Turtle's win ratio over the 30 days after the patch is released, which is most likely going to be on Wednesday, as Wargaming are releasing preload messages all over their website, doesn't catapult towards the upper end of this list, I think getting to at least the TS5, if not overtaking it, I would be very surprised. And I hope Wargaming have considered that the reason why the Turtle is not popular is not because it's underpowered. It's absolutely fine inside the game. It's because the gameplay is just so boring. And when you are forced to make the carrot, not because the tank is fun, but just because it's completely overpowered, that is not making a better game. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about all of the buffs and nerfs coming in the 1.22 update. Do you think the turtle needs to receive all of this? And are there any vehicles that you're specifically looking forward to playing in the next update of World of Tanks? And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for the World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. So come along right now as I start at tier 1 and work my way up towards tier 10 so you can see whether this week's featured tech tree is worth playing. So really looking forward to seeing you all live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.